Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Welcome back to another review of Did You See That? Where we take our favorite reviews out of the group chat into the world of social media to share with you. My name is Noxolo.
I'm Bonolo.
And today we are reviewing my personal favorites.
Yambos. Makeba. Ndabezita. I'm sure you've guessed.
You're not a serious person. I was ready to be like, drum roll.
Oh, my bad. I'm sorry.
Hey,
You can
Shaka.
rewind. Drum roll.
Shaka
Ilembe. Yambos.
Okay, let's be serious. Yes, okay, so today we're going to be reviewing episode 1 of season 2 of Shaka Ilembe. Back yesterday on Sunday it aired, and it'll be airing every Sunday at 8 p.m. Mzansi Magic. We're particularly excited about this one. Bom did a really good job in last season.
Yeah. I'm actually willing to say it was probably the best production to come out of South Africa.
Agreed. From the cinematography,
hundreds,
the writing, the cast, stellar. So we begin the episode of season 2, episode 1, with now Shaka entering his period as reigning as king of the Zulu nation, Kwanobamba. Last season explored a lot of Shaka's childhood and the journey to him becoming a man and to ascending the throne, and particular themes around struggle, destiny, rejection, fighting for what you believe is
rightfully yours,
destiny, essentially, and how he was taken as was under training by U Dingswayo, of
finance man,
the king of the Mtetwa nation. Yes. And so now we enter into episode 1, where he has now returned to Kwanobamba. He returns with the Amabuto of the Mtetwa clan, but when he gets there, the Zulu Amabuto do not allow them in. And apparently the reason for this is because his coronation hasn't taken place already. Right? Very interesting, I think, the starting of that, because his return is marked with a lot of themes, right? One, him and Nandi are returning to a place that was once very painful, and
that they were excommunicated
from. And you see the recollection of that from both of them. With Ushaka, it's the rejection from his father. And with Unandi, it's the rejection from Usenzangakhona, but also people who betrayed her in the process for what she has always believed, that the heir to the throne was Ushaka. And so those themes are explored, and Ushaka, with the advice of his grandmother Umtaniya and Umkabai, is to make peace and unite the Zulu kingdom, because there are people. He's almost entering a den,
a snake's pit,
as she calls it, essentially, because there are people who are not everyone is excited about his reign. You'll notice that in the last season he killed his half brother Uskujana. In this season, he also killed Umntwana Mudli as well, and then in this season he killed his half brother Upaguza as well, and then his 3 other half brothers have ran away out of fear that they might be next. And so you also see advisors to the throne and some of the Amabuto being very skeptical around him ascending to the throne as king. And so he is entering a snake's pit, because not everyone can be trusted in this. And so so we're now essentially exploring that. We're also then introduced to, in addition to the Ndwandwe clan, we're also introduced, and the Mtetwa clan, which was there last year. We're introduced to new characters in this, which is Upungashe, who is the king of the Buthelezi clan. And then also we then see how that then plays in. He is frustrated because Ushaga has obviously assassinated his grandson, and he goes and tells Dingiswayo about this. Dingiswayo says, I won't stop you.
Yeah, I'm not about it.
I'm not about it.
Which I thought was kind of shady, considering that he was his mentor.
He was
But
like,
I think it's also coming from a place of like, I trust that.
Yeah, that he will do the right thing.
Yeah.
So, but I think that what we're seeing here is he is faced with a bit of a challenge in terms of, do I take the peaceful route and unite everyone, even those that have done me wrong, or do I become a tyrant? And I think for now, what we see is he has decided to take the advice of his aunt and grandmother and is leading on good faith. We'll see where that takes us. So that's essentially what happens. But there's many stories and issues here, So we obviously have Udingiswayo, who treats Ushaga as his own son in a way, because he was trained under him, and he sees him as more of a son than his actual son. And I think it's because he sees a lot of himself in Shaka when he was younger. And we can kind of see that there will be a war brewing because Upungashe is angry at what Shaka has done. We also have the Ndwandwe clan that has their own agendas, specifically around Dingiswayo. And I think the reason they go that route is because they know that Shaka draws his strength from him. So yeah, that's essentially episode 1. I think those were really the themes that were kind of, explored. The return to a place that once hurt. Do I choose peace? Do I choose tyranny? And just introducing us to the different characters this season, I think, as well, and the people that are plotting against the king too. Yeah, what did you think?
Yeah, so first of all, and this is a side note, but I struggle with shows that have a long time that lapse until the next season, because half the time when I was watching the first episode of the season, I was like, Konje, what happened in the previous episode, right? So I had to go back and like reacquaint myself with the different sort of characters and stuff to understand like where did we leave things, etc. But I thought it was a strong first episode for the season.
Agreed. Very solid.
Yeah, I think it was quite solid. I think what I've always enjoyed about Shaka Ilembe is that there's different moving parts that are happening at the same time, and there are storylines that happen across the different kingdoms at the same time. And I think it was quite interesting, or it's always been quite interesting and very artistic in how they weave those different stories to come together.
Agreed.
So, for example, even with Dingiswayo's son, who is now sort of being used as a pawn in order to get more information that will then somehow lead back to Shaka, has been quite interesting to explore. And then also just in terms of that clan, it's the Mtetwa, right? With the lady with the witch.
The Ndwandwes.
It was that the Ndwandwes, yeah. It's also interesting the dynamics that happen there, because they're also, they're also being led by a king who then wants his sons to have their own sort of kingdoms as well, so that there isn't intergenerational fighting in terms of who will ascend to the throne, whereas we haven't necessarily seen that theme portrayed on Shaka's side. So I enjoyed it in that it set the scene in terms of just themes of power, ascension of power. Do you take, the peaceful, unite everybody route? Do you take the tyranny route? Is it possible to ascend to power through a peaceful route? Which I thought was quite an interesting question that Shaka has to somewhat answer.
Yeah. I think also the reason why he assassinates his siblings, right,
Mm.
is so that there is no competition to the throne,
Yeah.
and to almost kind of consolidate his power, so that no one has a stake to the throne besides him.
Besides him.
But which is very interesting, because even though that is what is the norm, what he's done, um, he ends up saying in the film that his brothers who have gone into exile should come home. So and I think it's to the advice,
Yeah.
perhaps, of him choosing the route of peace.
But then it's also contradictory, because you haven't historically done that. You've already assassinated two of your other brothers.
Of your
So
brothers.
obviously it's like, why would I, as your brother in exile, want to come back because I don't know what
Because
it
I
is
fear
that
for my life.
Exactly, because you've already shown historically that you've chosen the tyranny route. So nothing communicates to me as your brother in exile that you'll now all of a sudden take the peaceful route, considering that you do want to consolidate everything and, like, you know. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting in terms of seeing where the season goes.
Yeah.
And what path he decides to take. I mean, we know, like, historically which path was taken, but I'm quite interested to see the artistic direction of where this one is going to go.
I agree.
Yeah.
I think what is also interesting in what you've mentioned is that the storylines, even though the bigger storyline is around Shaga's rule and him eventually wanting to consolidate power, but also have one Zulu nation instead of multiple kingdoms, right? Is that in the different kingdoms that we are introduced in, there's a storyline in that. And I think the interesting thing that we'll see if it's explored in the Ndwandwe clan is there are obviously competing interests amongst the sons on who will become heir to the throne. But what I picked up was his nephew,
Whose nephew?
Inkosi Amandwandwe.
Okay.
His nephew.
Yeah.
I think, remember that scene where they came back from war, and then
they were all posturing about who did what on the field.
Yeah. And then Usoshangane says your nephew also was the one who, was it him, to deliver
the king.
Yeah. Yes. And he also gets praised. But when Inkosi Amandwandwe says to his sons, you guys should not be fighting, I want all of you to have your own kingdoms. The camera pans to the nephew.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if the nephew feels left out in just the facial expressions that I was reading. Almost as if he feels left out, and also wonder of, where do I fit into
in? Yeah.
this
and
story?
Somewhat of not an overcompensation, but there's the vibe that I get from him is a need to also cement himself.
Yes.
So that he is a potential as well.
Yes, and not just servant to the king.
Exactly.
Or servant to the king's sons.
Yeah.
So that will be interesting to see how that kind of plays out, I think. And then also with Ntombazi, who is the king's mother. She forever a witch child.
She always
that brain the CGI. Yeah, the CGI is crazy.
Yeah, with the hyenas
is crazy. But you also see but I think what's another theme here is the role of the woman.
I was gonna say that. Yeah,
is the role of the woman, because you kind of see how they play a role in the ruling and kingmakership and behind the scenes of orchestrating things. So we'll see now with her granddaughter, who I think is gonna go seducing. So
I also thought that. Yes. She was like, your brother has a plan.
I saw in the trailer that they kissed, so I said, Dingiswaya, my baby.
Dingiswayo Sangoma chick passes away, ne? She died in the previous season.
She lives.
Oh,
they find each other, I remember, in Dalgoa Bay.
Yeah.
And she's alive there, and she practices as a healer there.
Oh, and so she can't be with him. Is that the reason they can't be together?
I don't remember. I don't think she came back with him when he came to claim his throne. So
Yeah.
I think she's still alive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is, that would be interesting.
For her to
From
come
a
back.
from a future perspective.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Very, very much. But yeah, just the role of the woman as well in that.
yeah.
And it was so interesting because I saw someone say, I saw one of the comments on Instagram, they were saying, I don't really understand, like, is Umkabai for Ushaka? Is she not? Because she's getting intel around plans to assassinate him. But, it's like, you're a bit of a enigma right now. Where are you in this?
I think she's for him. I think she uses, first of all, Don Tanika King has crazy sex appeal. I'm sorry, I needed to get that
Love
out
her
there.
down.
I needed to get that out there.
And just aura.
She's got an aura, man. She's just
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10. And I think in this particular situation, she uses, which is also quite interesting, right? She's not overly, or rather her sexual prowess is not in your face, right? But I enjoyed how they explored.
Her character doesn't lead with that.
Her character doesn't lead with that, but I also enjoyed how they explored how, not necessarily she uses that, but she has a certain aura, whatever, to get information out of people. And I think that information is going to be used strategically. And I think historically we've seen she's been for him anyway, and I think she understands. Yeah, she understands the complexity of being in Shaka's position as well, and she also understands why people have the views that they have of him. But she also says to the guy who comes to seduce her little side piece, that she says to him that, well, if they think that I'm going to now switch gears, like, do they honestly think that that's what's going to happen? And he's like, well, they clearly know your position. So I do think that in a way she is for Shaka. I just think that she is probably strategic in terms of how she's going to make use of this information.
I think I have a different perspective.
Okay.
I think she is loyal to Ushaka now because it is what is most strategic. And so because eventually what happens is that, well, in the old Shaka and what we were taught in school is that she plays a part in his assassination.
Really?
When he's assassinated by his brother Udingani, who then ascends the throne, right? So she is key in the orchestration of that assassination. And so I think Umkabai is very similar. Have you watched Game of Thrones? She's very similar to, in this Zulu Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
She's very similar to Lord Varys in Game of Thrones, who was neither here nor there for anyone. What he was loyal to was the throne.
The throne.
Isihlalo, of course, he was loyal to the throne and the protection of the throne, and not necessarily who sits on that throne. And so my loyalty stretches as far as how beneficial you are to bring stability, to bring strategy, to bring alliances. And once the throne becomes unstable under your ruling, I could switch sides.
Okay. So I'm loyal to the throne, not necessarily the person who's
Yes. So I think for now it makes strategic sense because she always said that he was the rightful heir to the throne. Right? And so under her counsel, she says to him, this is what we need to do to bring unity into the kingdom. This is what we need to do. And so eventually, I think what then leads her in a different direction is the growing concerns around that Ushaga had become a tyrant, became erratic in his decisions, didn't want an heir to the throne, was killing babies that were so as he grows more erratic, I think is when she then she will probably later on in the season consider switching sides.
Interesting.
So, and I think it's interesting to explore her in that way because it ties very well to how people have termed her the kingmaker, you know, and historically Mukabai was known to be a kingmaker, a strategist. And so she clearly becomes a very key figure in kingmakership with Ushaka, where she informs him about plans to assassinate him in the last season. The intel that she gets around plans to assassinate him now. And then eventually her switching sides. So in a way, she is a bit of a mystery, I feel, because she doesn't show her hand.
True. However, what I am thinking about in you telling me your different perspective, I was just thinking about how it's so interesting how, as a person who's watching this show, who has no historical context, the perception is quite different, right? So I think, and we were talking off camera about how I don't know anything about Shaka. Like, I didn't learn Shaka in school. I don't
decolonize the curriculum.
Listen,
honey. Actually,
listen,
we should.
my history
Shaka
class was
shwe.
yeah. My history was Tsar Alexander III and like Mao and like, you know, so that's why I'm saying from a watching this from a clean slate perspective, without having any historical knowledge of the fact that like Mukabaye switches sides and all of these things, it's quite interesting watching it from that perspective, and then also watching it from a perspective where you do have historical to kind of then see what direction will this particular season take, right?
And what creative direction.
And what creative direction.
To what extent.
To what extent, which then also goes into a broader conversation about how essentially even after the first season, as you know, or as you might not know, the Zulu Nation, well, not all of them, but like the Zulu Nation was quite uncomfortable with the telling of the story and the historical what, and they tried to get an interdict on like the second season. The point that I was making is that it's going to be interesting watching this and us reviewing this where you have historical knowledge and I have none, because then our predictions in terms of where the seasons can go will bring juice.
Yeah, but it'll also be interesting to see like the direction as well of how Bomb and the directors and the writers took
and how much creative freedom.
Yes, and how much creative, because also what I was confused about, creative license they use, because what I was confused about in this season, when Baguza was killed, I was like, now who is this?
Yeah,
right?
I was also confused.
And then I was like, his grandfather is Pungashe, who is of the Buthelezi kingdom. So how, but isn't his grandfather supposed to be Ujama, right? So because he's Senzanga Kona's son, making him Shaga's half brother. But then when I looked online, and please feel free to comment, tell us, when I looked online, apparently there was no relationship there. So
between Pungashe
and Baguza.
Okay.
So I was like, interesting. I wonder why they decided to
take it in that direction.
Yeah. But it eventually leads to the dispute between Upungash and Utingiswai, which is what is apparently historically accurate.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
but
yeah,
I think it's a good production, and I think in the first season there was a lot of skepticism online, and I think some of that skepticism was just unjust, in the sense of people were trying to compare it to the old Shaka Zulu, the Henry Cele version.
Okay.
And I think it's so important to look at a body of work independently from the other.
Agreed.
You know, it doesn't make sense to be like, oh, this person played Shaka better than the other person, you know, because then you can't appreciate the full body of work for what is the offering now. You know. So, and I think also this is its own production and its own creative license that fortunately, unfortunately, production houses have decided to take. You know, that's the basis of art. So yeah, but I think season 1 was a success. Very excited to see now where we actually get to see Ushaga as a king, and what ruling in his kingdom is going to look like, and exploring those themes. And yeah, I agree with you. It was a solid start to the season. Yeah, 10 out of 10 first episode.
Okay, 10 out of 10. Are you sure it's a 10 out of 10 or is it because when a lady crush on certain characters?
Right now. Yeah, I think it was like cinematography, the actors,
The music. For me, it's the scoring.
yes,
of
the
this thing.
scoring,
It's just
but also I feel like how
incredible.
Bomb has done a really good job in terms of bringing the right mix of someone was like the first scene felt like an Ismaya reunion
Yeah.
because some of the characters we've recognized from Ismaya before, but they've done really well from a casting perspective of bringing like the right mix of actors that we've seen or know from scenes in the industry before, and then like new faces, and how it just like blends in. I haven't really felt like this one can't act, like what's going on here. It's teka-taking, you know. Everyone is well cushioned, like, you know, and it's just like it's a marvel to see, I think, the casting of this on this end as well. You know, the only interesting thing was how they've aged everyone, but Unandi has not been aged yet.
Yeah.
Which I wonder if like that was also one of the critiques last season of just like the age differences between people, and does this person look like does Senzanga Kona look like Shaga's father? Does Unandi look like Shaga's mother? But I wonder if that was intentional, just around like how when people tell the story of Unandi and the struggles that she's gone through in raising Ushaga, but also of the timeless beauty she was, and if that was like intentionally done or not.
I think it was. I think particularly as from a costume and a makeup design perspective,
she's very regal.
She's very, very regal.
She stands above.
Listen. Whew, Nomzame!
Nomzame vibes?
My vibes. Yeah. She babes.
She. 10 out of 10.
10 out of 10. But yeah, I think considering, you know, the history that you've told me in terms of how Nandi was perceived as a timeless beauty and stuff, I think that was an intentional decision to keep her that way. So yeah, it's going to be interesting.
Your scoring rating?
Oh,
thoughts?
My scoring, I think I will give it a 8 out of 10.
Okay. Why not 10 out of 10?
I think an 8 out of 10. So I think definitely first season was a 10 out of 10. I think now, because I'm also still trying to find my feet, piece things together. In terms of this season and them showing us what happened previously, I feel like I shouldn't have had to go to the previous season's last episode to remind myself of what has happened. Like, I think they could have probably done a better job in terms of like, reminding us high level, this is what happened previously and this is how we continue. Because I did find myself being like, Konje. And then, especially with the introduction of Pungashe. Is it Pungashe?
Yeah, but he's new.
He's new, but like the introduction of him, and that's why I'm saying, because he is new, a lot of this episode was centered around a war that's looming as a result of this new character. But there wasn't a lot of exploration in terms of who this person comes, like who is this person? You know what I mean? Like, if it was a thing of like a war is looming between Shaga and Ondwandwe, it would make sense because we've seen that there's been tensions previously. Okay. But if you're going to introduce a new character, I felt like they needed to be a little bit more exploration. Context. Yeah, context. That's the word I'm looking for.
Other than he is Baguza's grandfather.
Exactly. And then also, who's Baguza?
Son of Senzanga Kona.
I know, but that's what I'm saying, is that because
but yeah, you're right, because I was very
a central character in the previous season,
and I was like, now whom
exactly
Uvelaphi.
Exactly. And how, and that's the thing, is that if you're going to be the reason for why a war is looming, I'm going to need a lot more context in terms of understanding the connection and, you know, all of that stuff.
Understandable.
So yeah, so that's why I'd give it an 8. But obviously, I don't know how many part episodes this season is going to have.
I think, well, going from last season, which was 10, so
okay,
maybe
yeah,
around the
so,
same.
yeah, but I think, yeah, I think an 8 is still a pretty solid.
Mm.
So yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Awesome.
But yeah, let us know what you guys thought of the first episode
In the comments.
in the comments below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do subscribe to the channel.
We are so back.
We are so back. We're not going to leave you hanging anymore.
Mm.
So yeah, let us know what you guys thought and catch us next week for the next review. Cheers.